Welcome to the Open Fire podcast. Open Fire is an honest and informed dialogue on fire safety issues. We direct discussions with some of the fire industry's most prominent and recognised leaders. Your presenters are myself, Dave Calvert, Operations Director at Franklin Risk Management Services, and with me in the studio I have legend Tom Gilbert.
Hello, David. How are
Legend,
you?
does that work this week?
I mean, to be fair, of all of the introductions you've given me, that's my favourite, but probably the most unrealistic.
How are you doing this week? All right.
Really good, yeah. And how's your week been?
Very good. We've got a new addition to the studio this week.
We have.
For eagle-eyed viewers, will notice on the table we've got a mini William Baldwin.
A mini Willie.
A mini Willie. We did have a big Willie.
We did.
From a previous episode where Tom presented me.
Was the episode that good?
Hang on, can we just be clear about what we're talking about before you introduce me? It's the picture on the table?
It's the picture on the table, yeah. Just for the record, you are not Little Willie in the context of this conversation.
So for continuity purposes, I think we should
Yes.
explain that you presented me with a large, signed, authentic William Baldwin photograph.
I did. I felt that you deserved to have something that was relevant to Backdraft rather than just your musings.
Indeed. And with every intention of putting it on the table, however, once we put it on the table, it was so large that you then couldn't see our guest.
Absolutely. It's, if anything, it's more expensive to get you a small William Baldwin photograph. The bigger ones apparently are cheaper for those reasons.
So the one we've got on display is a
Fake.
fake.
But the one that you've got in your snug at home
Yes,
is real.
is real.
So the whole idea is that if the podcast doesn't take off, we should be able to sell that photograph and make our money back. That's the intention.
Is that how much it cost you?
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
I'm not a cheapskate, Dave. Good presents cost good money, so that's why you got it.
If you say so.
Well, I did expense it, but we'll brush over that.
I think you've got the introduction for this week.
I have indeed. So, for those of you who can't see him, I've got Steve Lakin on the sofa with us this week. And Steve commenced his career as an operational firefighter in Kent before becoming a senior officer in Kent Fire and Rescue, and then flew off to New Zealand to become the Deputy Chief Fire Officer in Auckland. And having served 30 years in the fire brigade, Steve then became the head of fire at Heathrow, which is when we met, actually, and then became the head of fire safety at Balfour Beatty, and has now seen the light, I believe. It depends on how you feel about it. Seen the light and is now managing director of his own organisation, which is Fire Safe Global. And part of the reason he's here is to also talk about his involvement in something called the National Construction Fire Safety Group. So thank you for joining us, Steve.
Thank you.
That's it. That's the end of the episode.
Thank you so much.
We just do a really big, broad
Hang on,
intro.
I'm going to take my glass off, because apparently when you take glass off, you mean business.
You've been going to these leadership classes. Now you're an MD, you see. So Steve, I mean, there's a lot of questions that we're going to want to ask. I think that the main reason for today is to really start to explore construction fire safety a little bit. We've done an awful lot around management. We've talked about the golden thread of information. We've talked about the Building Safety Act. We've talked about Grenfell Tower. We've talked about the Grenfell inquiry. And we've started to delve into procurement and other aspects of fire safety in the fire safety industry. But we haven't really focused on construction. And obviously, my past at Lend-Lease, your past at Balfour Beatty, and obviously now what you're doing as an organisation, the fire safety in construction is a relatively complex and difficult subject. So I think it would be good to start to explore things like the JCOP and the challenges that contractors face in terms of day-to-day safety, as well as exploring other aspects of it. But I suppose the big question for me at the beginning really is, what is the National Construction Fire Safety Group, Steve?
Okay. Well, look, great. Thanks for letting me come today. It's really... I've been on a sofa with you before, but it was in a different situation.
It was, absolutely. There was probably more beer involved as well.
And thank you. I just want to set the record straight as well by saying that the photo on the table is one of my favourite movies.
Yes, Steve. Yes,
It
Steve.
is.
Thank you,
Backdraft,
Steve.
one of the best.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, we used to learn a lot from movies like that in the fire service, and we did, seriously.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
it brought things to the table. And secondly, seeing the light at Balfour Beatty, it was a great organisation to work for. And you've asked the question about the national forum, and that's where it really all started. So good that you've explained my background, and obviously lots of people know me for lots of really nice reasons, and the journey so far has been wonderful. So let's talk about the national forum then. So when I was at Balfour, I was lucky enough to go to the national health and safety group across all the tier 1 contractors.
Yep.
And there was lots of conversations in there about health and safety issues, which was wonderful because tier 1s were able to learn from each other. And we posed the question, look, the tragedy at Grenfell, and it was a tragedy as we all know, has happened, and it would be great to share across organisations what we do about fire safety management during the construction process. So the challenge was set to go and form a group, and that's what we did about 18 months ago. And, we had great input at the front end, and, we shared procedures and looked at best practice. There was lots of lessons learnt opportunities, and still is. And when I was the chair of that group, and you know this, Tom, we posed the question, where do we want to go as an industry? And lots of people ask the question, so what's the difference between, we all think about fire safety in construction, we think cladding, and we think the way things are built with the right materials at the right time, certificated, etc. And I think there's a clear distinction and differential actually between building safety and fire safety management during the process. So two different completely things. Passive fire protection is all the building safety things and service penetrations, etc. Building things in the right way. But during the construction process, I always saw things that there was a gap. And I'm not just talking about that from a business perspective, but there was a gap. There was documents and there's guidance that says how do you manage your arrangements, but where did that sit? It was, is it in a health and safety function, or is it in a planning to construct things with the construction management plans? And that's generally how things were really segregated. But there was a lot of overlap and I think a lot of grey area. But what was really clear was all the tier 1s were doing things in a really positive way. But where was it written down? And that's always going to be the challenge when you're building things. If you're ever challenged by a regulator, and we know now there's 3 regulators, if not 4. So you've got the HSC, you've got the Building Safety Regulator, you've got the Fire and Rescue Service, and ultimately we're going to have a new one now as well. When that comes off the ground. But if you're ever challenged, the question is, demonstrate to me that you've got management arrangements in place, and having a verbal response to a regulator never enthralls them with energy.
No.
So having things in plans and processes are really important. So let's go back to the group. The group said, right, we've got JCOP, we've got HSG 168. Why don't we go away and write a new manual, a publication on how do you manage things? That was number one. Number two was, we need to be able to communicate better, and things like the lessons learned. So we played around that for a little while, and then the other point was there was a lot of. It appeared at the time there was conflict between JCOP and HSG 168 in a few places. So it was, how do we resolve that? After about 6 months of reviewing things, it became quite clear from the tier 1s that actually, why would we write a new publication when there's already ones there? It would be quicker and easier to, actually take the ones that we've got and make them better. So for the last 6 months, the group have actively taken both documents and said, actually, if we were able to comment and make them better, what would the text look like? And, speaking to the HSC and talking to some great people in the Fire Protection Association, the work now is to try and get rid of some of the differences, but have a new and improved set of documents. And I think the tier 1s, we're working with lots of them, as a business, their journey already, and not just about that group. That hasn't been the genesis of that. Of course, Grenfell's been the genesis for lots of things. They're certainly in a better place. So that's really, really good all round. So we're seeing two things, as we're out there, is building fire safety is really shifted the dial.
Yeah.
And moving in the right direction. And fire safety management has definitely improved. And, look, it's one of these things that's really hard to come up with tangible evidence to say how it's improved.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing is a cultural shift with leadership. They're really understanding things, and they already did, but now they're seeing a different set of circumstances.
Yeah.
And it's getting into a really, really, great place. Because, tangible evidence in terms of health and safety is someone hasn't hurt their leg or hasn't cut their finger or had a tragic accident. The tangible evidence in fire is, well, we didn't have a fire.
Yeah, and sometimes that's luck rather than judgment, right?
Yeah, and we're always going to see, the media, since Grenfell, I think that's about the sixth time I've said it today, is any time there's a fire, it's going to be all over the newspapers.
Yeah, of course.
And we need to provide assurance to the people that we're working with that their environment is safe. And, then there's not going to be one of these accidents in a place of work or on a construction site. So
there is a common misconception, isn't there? We see these pictures of fires in buildings, and obviously the media will make a certain amount of comment about it, and you can almost hear every fire engineer and every fire risk assessor saying, no, that's evidence of the building worked correctly because the fire actually hasn't spread vertically or horizontally.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a misconception of what you're seeing in the image.
No deaths, no image. No deaths, no injuries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Building probably performed okay, right?
Yeah, and I think look, this production that's going out today will hit globally across our industry. I know that because lots of people will see it, and we're all working to different sets of standards and guidance across the world. But ultimately, there's a core common denominator, which is people need to be responsible, which they are. And people need to have a risk-assessed set of parameters that they work to keep a place of work safe, or a construction site being a place of work. Because this isn't just about buildings, right? It is a place of work that we're dealing with.
Of course, yeah, so, absolutely.
That's really important. I mean, that the national group is absolutely what was needed, and there's more to do. There's a lot more to do.
I mean, most of the tier ones are in that group, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And they're all actively engaged, which is wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you talked about building safety, and the focus of the industry at the moment is building safety, right? But actually what the JCOP is and what construction site fire safety is about, building safely, right? So you've got building safety and building safely, right?
Yeah.
And those are the two bits. And I think at the moment, and I mentioned this at one of the groups, I think, was we are so focused on the end user and the end customer, and that deliverance of, a safe building and a compliant building with a great deal of assurance. Is there a risk that we take our eye off the ball of the actual building it safely?
Yeah, so I think that there's an enhancement to that, Tom, and what it is there's building safety, building things safely, as you've said.
Yeah.
But then there's also process fire safety, which is a building that's been occupied, right? The challenge in that construction space is, design teams will actively look at the way things are being built now, with the right materials. All that's definitely going on in different ways. When you're building something, you haven't got those protection measures in place that will have when you hand the keys to the door over, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the sprinkler systems haven't been commissioned, the fire alarm system isn't working.
Yeah.
And you've got products that are unprotected.
And actually the likelihood of a fire happening is significantly higher anyway.
A lot higher in construction, a lot higher. And Dodie, you said about, when there's a fire and it didn't spread. But of course what we've got to deal with here is, it's about people's safety ultimately. But having a fire on a construction site is reputational brand damage. So, to an organisation that would have a fire, everybody looks and says, why would we want to build something with them in the future?
Well, yeah, and I remember someone being rescued off the roof of a building very, very close to PC that caught fire in the news 8 months ago, something like that, and someone was rescued off the roof with a crane, weren't they?
Yeah.
And having heard about the reputational, the risk associated with the reputational aspects of that, despite the fact that potentially that guy might have been able to just walk off site.
Yeah.
The reality was he was rescued off site in a crane, so actually it becomes more dramatic.
Yeah.
But that reputational thing is very, very real,
absolutely
isn't it?
Yeah. And, the same things apply regarding having means of escape and, during that construction process, you've got raw materials.
What tends to be the common causes in construction site fires these days?
I think the biggest one, probably without a doubt, so we always look at things really simply as we can. And we ask 3 questions. So what could catch fire? What could make it catch fire? And then who's at risk, right? So you might not get to question 3, but actually probably the biggest cause, and it's hard to get data.
Yeah.
It always has been hard to get data during the construction process, but it's got to be something electrical. It's not smoking anymore. It's not those things. It's things like electrical cabling, or it's people that are using, a 240 volt charging bank plugged into a 110 volt charger.
So that's actually, rather than electrical, that's more human error, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's why I was talking about the culture is moving,
Yeah.
because there's certainly an awareness. But, lithium ion products, that's got to be our number one risk, because you can have all the means of escape and you can have those bits and pieces which are super important, but you have a damaged tool used by a contractor, they're not going to go and replace a battery at £300 a piece.
No.
And so it's, the vapes, the battery products, because they're very difficult to extinguish, right? So,
Yeah.
and that's not just a UK problem, that's across the globe at the moment. So that's where our thoughts and, processes around is what could catch fire and what could make it catch fire in the first place.
So you talked about the JCOP, and the JCOP is just used in construction as if it's a thing, right? So JCOP stands for Joint Code of Practice, right? Yeah. Of which there are lots of them. But in construction, the JCOP is a sacrosanct document, like the other document that you mentioned that the HSE released. But the JCOP is a document fundamentally published by the Fire Protection Association, isn't it? As an insurance reduction tool. So it's a quantum reduction tool, isn't it, on terms of the fires that you experience. What is it? What's the point of a JCOP? How does that work for your average constructor?
Okay, and you'll have to excuse me to the FPA if I'm going to get this completely wrong. But so JCOP, we're on I think version 10.1 at the moment, and JCOP is a document that really helps you to sort of risk profile during the build process, and gives guidance to those that have responsibilities, and pulls together all the things around travel distances and means of escape and vertical and horizontal fire separation. And it is a document that's really sponsored, if you like, in its loosest terms, by the insurance providers. The challenge is now that the insurance providers are closely looking at JCOP to make sure that it's being applied on builds, right? So if there's some guidance that says, actually, you've really got to follow this, or you've got to come up with something that's super, equivocal in terms of, standard. So JCOP is really, really followed a lot, along with HSG 168. So that is the guide. That's the Bible, really, for construction companies.
It's very prescriptive, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
Yeah,
and for the right reasons. But with anything, you've got to be able to. I know we're focusing on construction. There's a whole world outside of construction, but whenever there's a challenge, the challenge is: did you follow it? And if you didn't, what else did you use? Did you use a British standard?
Yeah.
So organisations, and this is why it's a bit of a minefield, we're in the same spot with construction as what we were with legislation before Grenfell.
Yes.
Is a really good analogy. So imagine, before the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order came out in 2005, there was lots of legislation. And the idea was, let's reform it into one place. Now what's happened as a result of that is, that tragic incident, is that we're now starting to see into more legislation again. So we're almost going around the circuit. Well, we're already still in the first circuit with construction.
Yes.
There's lots of guidance for people to follow. And as a responsible person, you've got to be able to demonstrate you've considered all guidance.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I think most constructors, this is like the nugget, I think, is most constructors are rightly and required by law to bring in a fire risk assessor to risk assess their site. Fire risk assessor will come in who potentially is not an expert in JCOP, but will be, let's give everyone the credibility, a competent to do a fire risk assessment of a construction site in terms of identifying the hazards and the controls and and dealing with risk and people and making sure the travel distances are appropriate. A lot of tier 1 contractors and tier 2 contractors will assume that because they've had a fire risk assessment undertaken, that shows that the level of risk in the building is acceptable. They will assume that they've met the requirements of JCOP because they wrongly assume that fire risk assessor will use the JCOP as their guidance document to assess risk on site, and that's not right, is it?
Tom, this is the actual nugget of the whole world right now, isn't it? Is who's competent, and what qualifications? What does competence mean? Is it skills, knowledge, experience? Is it formal qualification? You're right that the guidance talks about different layers of complexity. Now, I talked about earlier where there was a gap because process fire safety with a building that's occupied, heaven and earth is being moved in terms of competencies and being on a register to be able to say that you can, carry out a risk assessment. But in that construction world, we've got a gap. And, the new guidance that's, coming out as the British standard that's out for consultation, that mentions construction sites, which is good. And the Tier 1 group are going to move towards a conversation with various organisations about forming a register, for those people that carry out a risk assessment, because it needs to be done in the right way. This isn't process fire safety. This is hard and fast, flammable liquids, flammable gases, and products that can cause a nasty mess and risk to life of somebody. So organisations will go and carry out a risk assessment. So we can go now on gov.uk and pull out the 5 steps to carrying out a risk assessment.
Yeah.
This is a little bit different.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've got to have somebody that understands the construction process and the risks associated with construction products. Lots to do. There's lots to do in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the problem that most people won't realise is that if they don't comply with the JCOP on their construction site, it's highly likely they're off insurance.
Yeah, that's the problem. So that's why insurers now, we're starting to see lots of questions asked. A year ago, an insurance provider would have asked the question of turn up to a construction site, ask lots of really, really good questions, but it was mainly around, will that product get wet?
Yeah.
And when it's finished, will the building be damaged? But now the questions are starting to ask are, how are you managing fire safety?
Yeah.
So what we don't want is like insuring your car and saying you keep it in a garage, but you don't. Insurance, company finds you didn't, right, we'll null and void your insurance. So it's really important that we do things in the right way.
Yeah. Because I think it's one of the questions I'm going to ask the Fire Protection Association when they come on is what have they got against chips? Because obviously part of the new JCOP was that you're not allowed a deep fat fryer on a construction site anymore. Obviously the whole of construction industry runs on chips, so I don't know what they've got against chips.
And we've got construction sites that say if we can't have chips, no one's coming to work.
Well, absolutely.
Right?
I wouldn't go to work if there wasn't chips.
But, look, I think, we've had that conversation and we sort of say in jest, but it is really important. Because there was a blanket prohibition of you can't have a deep fat fryer.
In any circumstances.
Yeah,
right.
But I don't, and talking to, lots of people who know things, which is what we all do, those words weren't written around deep fat fries in commercial kitchens.
No, of course they weren't.
They were talking about someone buying one from Tesco and putting it in a site office. There's a difference.
Yeah.
Right? So,
and that has happened.
Yeah, absolutely. But when we've got construction sites that have got Ansel extinguishing systems,
in an hour of fire resistance,
and you can't just have that as a well, can we have one then? Because there's got to be a series of other mitigation measures in place. And the majority of things is about people really taking on board fire safety management, being responsible, having a clear plan and a clear process. There's never a problem at senior leadership level in any organisation. No. But somewhere there's a breakdown. And that's with anything, isn't it? If you want to bring something into an organisation, you've got to have a demonstrable level of commitment through the business.
Yeah.
And from someone who is a contractor on site to the teams that are managing the site itself. But it's moving in the right direction.
What's that message that you'd like to get out there then? To what's the main change you would like to see from contractors to ensure that your fire safety is continually improving? What's the core message there?
Well, okay, that's a really, really good question. And I think if there was one clear thing I'd say to people would be, and this is not from a business point of view, by the way, is what we're here to do. One clear message is don't try and do it on your own. Don't try and go, look, I can do this risk assessment myself. I can write this plan, because the plan of how you manage your arrangements the knowledge that goes into that isn't just us as a business, isn't just one person. There's lots of views and areas of expertise that goes into that. You've got to have somebody on the site who's got the knowledge of what a construction plan looks like, of the stages of development, of what's going to be built at what stages. So I'm not just talking about the REBA stages. REBA is really important, that in the design you start thinking about where your fire doors are going to be and your vertical separation before you start building for cost management purposes. But the stages of, so in the next 3 months, what are our risks? What are the challenges, and therefore what mitigation measures do you need to put in place? That's the bit that you need some expertise from other places to go, it's all right you thinking these are the risks, but have you thought of this?
Yeah.
Okay, God, I didn't think of that. I'm so glad you're here. So one clear message, don't try and do it on your own.
Don't try and do it on your own, Tom.
I rarely do. I always get help where I can. What's the biggest challenge, do you think, that contractors currently face in construction site safety?
I think that it's hard to say a challenge, Tom, because I'm honestly seeing a move in temperature across everything. We're out there across the country working with lots of people, providing support. Try and move the energy a little bit from building safety to building things safely.
Yeah.
Try and separate the two, because that great energy of, as we already said, right materials, right time, tested, everything else, superb. But don't think that's just the answer.
Yeah.
The clear message is you've got products that are unprotected in that build process. Think about on-time deliveries, where things are going to go and where things are going to be stored.
Yeah.
Think about ignition sources. And seek help and guidance, because there are people out there. We're not just the only ones, right? So we're all there, aren't we? We, reach out, pick up the phone and ask the question. Don't be afraid. And that the industry's changed. People are willing to do that now. It was, let's punch the program through. I've got to meet this deadline, because there's a cost associated with program delivery. But people are now thinking a little bit wiser and outside the box a little, which is good.
Do you have any big horror stories from your experience, Steve, in regards to fire safety that you would put out there as cautionary tales?
I don't think that there's not. Look, lots of our horror stories come from experiences of being in the fire service, as it were. But on construction sites, it's really that understanding of there isn't. I can't put my finger on something and say, look, this was a horror story. Don't do this, because that horror story hasn't happened yet. The next big disaster is currently in the design process now. It will happen. We don't want it to happen, but it is going to. Right, we've got to put our hands up to it and say it's going to. We just need to say to people, consider the plan, consider what you're building and how you do things, and how you generate a message of comms across the site to everybody. Because, the horror story of a lithium-ion battery exploding that was in a means of escape is what's going to start it.
Yeah.
So there isn't something I can say, look, it was a cosh box that was mixed with chemicals and there was a battery inside it that was just waiting to explode. It's luckily enough we're now seeing managers who are spotting those things before they're going to happen.
Yeah.
So hopefully, we're not going to see lots of fires on construction sites anyway. But of course, we've talked about places of work, and we're all thinking, even now, as we're all reflecting and watching this, we're thinking about a building that's coming out the ground and going to be 22 stories high. And we're in London today, and this is going to go out everywhere, and you've only got to look at the skyline to see how many tower cranes there are and how many buildings are being built up. Let's remember as well, complex construction is underground, it's in tunnels. All those things about you've got 18 metres to get to an escape route. That's why you need somebody who's got some knowledge to practically understand that.
Yeah.
We are, as an industry, in the construction industry, and we're all in it. We've moved right. So the high-rise residential was on hold because of the two staircase issue, and tier ones. And I could probably say this, I'm not in a tier one now, but I'm there to support them. The tier ones diversified and got into things like energy and sustainability and environment-based, construction activity. Now what I've certainly started to see anyway, and this is only my view, by the way, is we've started to see construction companies take on existing buildings that were built 50, 60 years ago and are, gutting them completely and are building on top of them and below them. And now the high rise is starting to come back.
Yes.
So we've got to be geared up for that as an industry to know that there are still the same products, there's still the same level of risk, but we've either got long tunnels underground where we need to make sure we can get people out, or we've got high rise buildings that we need to make sure we can get people down.
Yeah.
And, a tunnel underground is the same as a high-rise, it's just there's less exits. So we are diversifying as an industry, and the industry I'm certainly seeing is booming across the world, right?
We're creating more complex challenges,
We
aren't
are, yeah. And we've got to be ready for that. So, one of the questions was around, what does competency look like? It's going to be a varying set of circumstances, right?
Yeah.
It isn't just about being on a register. It's about being able to demonstrate that the people that you're using to give you these assessments and giving you the advice is coming from a real thought-through, experienced, mindset.
So my horror story, Dave, was always when we were. Do you remember B3 in Peterborough Court when there was the guy that used to hide?
Back 20 years.
Yeah, there was a guy. Do you remember a welder used to hide acetylene? Do you remember?
I don't remember that.
So we used to hide acetylene under blankets in one of the plant rooms, and we used to have to go and start. We were literally going through looking for this guy, and he always used to light his acetylene torch with a lighter. And at the time, acetylene was banned on site. It was an old Goldman Sachs building, wasn't
Well, I think that really was our introduction to construction site safety, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
Very much what we'd been brought into.
We were at the epicenter of the start of the fire safety order, weren't we?
Yeah.
Because it was 2006 when we started.
But
I feel like there was an episode with Colin Basnett that we could get Colin Basnett from Metro to come on and talk about those days at Goldman Sachs?
You know what, I think it'd be a really good idea to talk, in the future about a specific and perhaps, wash it out, as it were. Not in public, I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about pull the points out of it.
Yeah.
Because you think how much we've moved as an industry now, and the audience of this, right? So the contractor that's, got a van and a team of 4 people that's building an extension has to follow JCOP.
Yeah.
But, equally the contractor that's got 500 people on site or has got 128 cranes in the air, at any one time,
They've also got to follow the same book.
they've got to follow the same thing, but on a scalable process. But where we came from was tar boilers that are powered by propane,
Yes.
and still have,
That used to boil over.
yeah. And now we've got tar boilers that are thermostatically controlled, and we've got people with thermal image cameras, checking as part of a hot works process. And we've got fire blankets, and we're seeing people with hot works. So all those measures around hot works are now really tight. I'm not saying we're not going to have another one, because it's up there in terms of risk,
Yeah.
right? But the whole industry's now moved
Yeah.
because there's a better understanding. But equally, and I'll make this point because it's really important. Great that we're building things out of brick, because we've always done, and the industry sort of moved back to that on the cladding
Yeah.
situation. And you look at a building and go, oh, thank God they're building it out of brick. Wonderful. But we're going to be building things out of timber and sustainable products.
Yeah.
So plastics, and wood, and in its unprotected state.
Well, yeah, that's the issue.
So we talk about the Swiss cheese effect, don't we, of turning that piece of Swiss, cheese around, all the holes aligning. We're in that spot now. So it's great we can talk about wonderful things because the dial has shifted. Okay.
Yeah.
But you've only got to get those holes to line, and we're going to have a disaster, and we don't want that.
No.
And we've got lots of professional people out there, all of us, and really like-minded people that stop that happening. And the leadership that we're seeing on construction sites is wonderful, but we must. Don't let that happen.
And we do have to acknowledge it's always likely to be the roofer that's going to set fire to your job.
You can say that, Tom. No, look, it's obviously it's a really important, point, and there's a lot we could talk about this absolutely forever and pull something apart. But it's about leadership, and it's about experience, and it's about the desire to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And that national group are absolutely in that space. They're absolutely committed. I've been lucky enough to stay on the group.
I got turfed off. I don't know how you managed to stay.
No, you could be there, Tom.
Okay,
But you know what's going to happen? We're talking about it now, and LinkedIn's going to go mad with Steve. I'd love to be on that group.
Yeah, of course.
And I need to.
It's not your group anymore, though,
No,
is
it's
it?
not.
No.
But it's great giving them, being able to give advice, and long may it continue,
Yeah.
really.
But I think kudos to the organisations that are in it. Kudos to Balfour,
We must do.
the early adopters, Sorrent McAlpine, Lend
Yeah.
Lease. There are a myriad of other organisations.
Yeah.
Mace,
Yeah.
all of them are part of that group.
Yeah, Mace, Skanska, you name it,
Yeah.
they're in there, and their knowledge and experience as people is driving the industry in the right direction.
Absolutely. And this is the reality of everything. And this isn't a criticism of the Fire Protection Association or the insurance industry at all.
No.
But the people that know how to build aren't writing the documents, are they?
No.
People that know how to build a building, and the people that know how to write documents are writing the documents. And actually, there's how do you get that collaboration to work? And actually, you're retrospectively doing that with that group, aren't you?
Yeah, because look on a site, we'll go on a site and you'll meet with a site manager, and they've been in the construction industry for 30 years.
Yes,
There's nobody knows more about how they build things than them, right?
absolutely.
And they'll say, look, I'm trying to follow this JCOP. I just can't make it work. How do we do it?
Yeah,
This isn't about taking a level of risk and going, look, we can put some mitigation measures in place. This is, what have you got to do,
yeah,
and how do you do it? And yeah, you're right.
yeah.
It's everybody.
And don't be afraid to ring your insurer, right? Don't be afraid to ring them.
Yeah, look,
Ring them and talk to them.
the insurers are there to support, right? Why would they not?
Yeah,
And the industry now will start to see insurers asking more questions about how do you keep that place of work safe during the build process, as well as asking the question around, can you just tell me how you're going to assure me that the timber's going to stay dry?
Yeah, absolutely.
And not have a leak.
And not catch fire.
Yeah.
Do you want to join our group, Steve?
Have you got a group?
Backdraftmovie.com.
Oh, do you know, I'm so glad we're back to that.
We had to get her eventually.
I feel like I should be watching it on the train going to work one day now.
So when we started the podcast, Dave started to talk about the Backdraft Movie Appreciation Society UK chapter, obviously.
Thank you.
And Dave had a real drive that he might lead the marketing for the podcast, and I said no because he'd had that website for 5 years and he had one member.
We've now got 146 members, Steve.
You
could
have
be
not.
147.
Have you actually got 140?
We've got 146 members.
How many did you have when we started?
One.
I said 148 because I'm thinking Tom as well.
So you're telling me 140 people that listen to this podcast have logged on to Open Fire Podcast, gone and found the link to your website.
Or they've just looked up www.backdraftmovie.com.
You could expand it a little bit and call it Fire Movies, because the other really good one is, of course, London's Burning.
What, the TV series?
That's not a movie,
No, the first one was like a movie, right? It wasn't a movie, but...
What was it? What, a TV movie? I'm not having TV movies on it.
Towering Inferno can be on it.
No,
oh, yeah, Dame Judith.
Expressed a preference. Said that was her favourite
it.
movie. She also said she wants to consign both movies to history because we shouldn't be living like that. And I said, well, what are we going to watch on a Saturday? You know? There's no point. You don't watch a movie about a building that was really safe.
She said it with affection, as in these are beautiful movies, but going forward,
don't remake them, consign them to history. So are you going to join the group?
It's free.
I am, but there's lots of fire services out there, that don't now like to celebrate those things. It's about prevention.
Yeah.
But I do think I should.
I think you should.
I'd like to be a member.
So
is there a cost?
No, it's free.
There's plenty of war movies out there, Steve. Doesn't mean that we all love war. I mean, there's obviously
Fury.
3 notable wars that are quite cool, which are, Tom?
Second World War.
Yep.
The First World War.
No.
Oh, really?
Vietnam War.
The Vietnam War, obviously.
And
that's going to be my
hang on, let's
one.
go back to Backdraft. I want to be in that group.
Star Wars trilogy.
Yeah, okay, fine. Oh no, I accept. To be fair, I accept that. But for me, World War I, World War II, great wars. They were good.
World War
wars.
II, Vietnam War, Star Wars trilogy.
Absolutely.
In that order.
We are not endorsing war, by the way.
Indeed, same
Other
as we're
wars
not
are
endorsing. Anyway.
Is there any news this week, Dave?
Well, on the subject of war, a war has broken out, Tom. You may be aware if you've been following the news.
I know, when I spoke to you before,
that's why I said
worried.
let's go back to talking about Backdraft.
Yeah.
So it's almost like we had a prepared segue, but we haven't. A war has broken out between the Association of Cycle Traders and the Bicycle Association and Electrical Safety First.
LBC are not covering this war, are they? Quite like they are the others.
Quite possibly. Quite possibly. Over the summer, as you may, and this ties in quite well with what Steve's been talking about to some extent, a draft members bill entitled the Safety of Electric-Powered Micro-Mobility Vehicles and Lithium Batteries Bill came out. And that's obviously to combat the issue of lithium batteries, and the prevalent fires that have occurred as a result of them. Electrical Safety First have obviously backed this bill and they're supporting it. However, the legislation as it stands proposes no transition period to build approval across the industry, and it would desiccate the UK. Pardon?
It would be instant, is what you're saying.
At the moment, it would decimate the UK industry of electric bikes by imposing a sudden months-long halt in sales, because it would essentially mean that all of these have to be pat tested or something. So you may agree or disagree whether that's a good idea, depending on which side of the fence you are. Jonathan Harrison of the Association of Cycle Traders explained, and this is an interesting quote because it's somewhat contradiction. There's a perception that's been allowed to develop that e-bikes are dangerous. That's not only inherently untrue, but also has the potential to do great damage to the sector.
Well, I mean, what could possibly be dangerous about
he goes on to say
now on a pedal bike?
He then goes on to say there is clearly an issue around e-scooter and e-bike fires that needs to be addressed. So a little bit of a contradiction there, from, Jonathan. Together with our colleagues at the Bicycle Association, we're keen for this situation to be tackled as swiftly as possible. Well, in New York, it's notable that in New York City, where third-party testing has been made mandatory, these mandatory measures reported little effect on fire incidents. So they had the mandatory testing introduced, didn't make a lot of difference to the number of fires.
Interesting.
Because most of the problematic products were sourced online and not from local retailers.
Yeah.
So that's the problem, is imports.
Yeah.
Regrettably, the food delivery app industry has been dragged into this war. The trade bodies feel that any new legislation aiming to meaningfully address fire risk must impose responsibility and, more importantly, liability on food delivery app operators who use these bikes to ensure that their equipment they use is safe. Seems a little bit unfair on whatever they're called.
Deliveroo,
yeah. What's the other one? Just Eat?
Uber Eats.
Can't be just them, surely.
I don't use any of them. Do you use them?
No, that's why I know them all.
But anyway, we will watch this story develop with interest.
Yeah.
I think, you know, sorry, Tom, you know what I was going to say? That is a really interesting point, you know, topic. We're in that space, aren't we? That everything is, you know, controlled by a battery of sorts, whether it's a laptop or it's a vape or it's a MUP on a construction site. But we're equally in a space where we want people to drive to work in a, you know, an electrical powered vehicle. We want to allow people to come to work that have got a form of restricted mobility, and they might be using some sort of device. And we've got people that are, you know, got children who've got these electric bikes and are stored in the hallway at home. Remember something Dame Judith said one time, and that was, don't wait for legislation to make a mandatory change. That's where we want to be. So let's not wait for that change. Let's already start.
It's interesting, Steve, that you've got a safety issue, and yet there still managed to be commercial pull on either side of the argument.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about that argument is that we see a similar argument in vehicles, with the difference between an internal combustion engine vehicle versus an electrical vehicle. And the point around those two is that the argument is that electrical vehicles, when they catch fire, tend to make the news because they're electric. But when an internal combustion engine vehicle fire happens, it tends not to, right? So that we are focused on that. But the difference between the bike argument is the alternative to an electric bike is one with pedals that doesn't catch fire. So with cars, you've got things that catch fire, whereas bikes, the other half is that you don't. But the interesting thing around all of this stuff is that your great-great-grandfather was there when we electrified lights, right? And then your great-grandfather was there when we electrified washing clothes. Then we've electrified washing dishes, and now we're at the point where we're electrifying everything else, right? We're at that point.
But didn't we
everything else will become
somebody was telling me one time we had on a push bike the lantern on the front, not in my time.
Yeah, dynamo.
No, before that, you put a chemical in the front and it reacted.
Oh, yeah, of
that
course.
gave you the lights. You'll be sitting here in 6 months' time. You aren't just talking about batteries, by the way. You're going to be talking about hydrogen, right? So
yeah, hydrogen's next.
Yeah, so we've got on sites now hydrogen masts and you know, lighting masts.
Yeah.
So that's the next thing.
What could possibly go wrong?
Don't say that.
And on that bombshell,
great to talk to you guys.
Really good to talk to you. So, guys, I think it's really important to note that we are independent and neutral, and anybody that wants to get involved can message us on LinkedIn and follow our page or website. We would love to hear from you, and if you'd like to appear on the show in the future or comment on anything that we've said in the past, then drop us a message and you can come down to the studio to discuss it with us.
Or join the website.
And obviously join the website.
Backdraftmovie.com.
Backdraftmovie.com, etc. Other movies are available. Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you, Dave.
Been a pleasure.
See you next week, chaps.